The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Flynn Randall's weathered face as he drove the last fence post into the hard California ground, sweat soaking through his cotton shirt, despite the dry desert air, and he paused only to wipe his brow before catching sight of a figure stumbling along the dusty road leading to his ranch outside Skidoo. It was 1887, and Flynn had spent the last 8 years building his cattle ranch from nothing, turning 500 acres of scrubland into something profitable through sheer determination and backbreaking work. He was 30 years old, and every line on his face told the story of those hard years. His dark hair was perpetually dusty, his hands calloused beyond recognition, and his heart as closed off as the heavy oak door that led to his ranch house. The figure on the road collapsed, and Flynn's gut twisted despite himself. He squinted against the glare, making out what appeared to be a woman in a torn dress, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. Every instinct told him to turn away, to let someone else deal with whatever trouble had brought her out here. Women meant complications, emotions, the kind of ties that could destroy a man's carefully constructed life. After what Caroline had done to him all those years ago, leaving him at the altar and running off with a silver prospector from Nevada, Flynn had made himself a promise. No woman would ever set foot in his house again. Not his mother, not his sisters when they visited from Sacramento, and certainly not some stranger who had clearly gotten herself into a mess. But she was not moving. Flynn cursed under his breath, dropped his tools, and started walking toward her. Then walking became jogging, and jogging became running as he realized she might actually be dying out there in the heat. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees in the dirt, his hands hovering uncertainly over her prone form. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with sun-darkened skin and dirt streaking her face. Her dress was expensive once, he could tell that much, but now it was ripped and stained with what looked like days of hard travel. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her breathing shallow. "Miss." He touched her shoulder gently, then more firmly. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, and for just a moment he saw her eyes. They were the color of amber, golden brown with flecks of green, and even in their half-conscious state, they held a fierce determination that made something in his chest constrict painfully. Then they closed again, and she went completely limp. Flynn did not hesitate any longer. He scooped her up into his arms, surprised by how light she was, and started back toward the house. She needed water, shade, and medical attention. He would take her to town to Doc Morrison's place. That was the plan. Except when he reached his horse, still saddled from his morning ride, he looked down at her face and knew she would not make the 3-mile journey to Skidoo in this condition. The promise he had made to himself echoed in his mind as he carried her up the porch steps. 8 years. 8 years of keeping women out of this space he had built for himself. But what was he supposed to do? Let her die? The door swung open, and Flynn carried her inside, breaking his most sacred rule with each step. He laid her on the sofa in his front room, a piece of furniture that had never been used because he lived his life in the kitchen, the bedroom, and the barn. The front room was for guests he never had. He fetched water from the pump, cold from the deep well he had dug himself, and dampened a cloth to press against her forehead and lips. She stirred slightly, her mouth parting to accept a few drops of water. He repeated the process, patient despite his racing heart, until finally her eyes opened fully and focused on him. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "My ranch, about 3 miles outside Skidoo." Flynn sat back on his heels, putting some distance between them. "What happened to you?" She tried to sit up, but he pressed a hand gently against her shoulder. "Easy now. You were passed out on the road. How long have you been out there? Her amber eyes filled with tears, which she blinked back furiously. 2 days, maybe 3, I lost track. You need a doctor. No. The word came out sharp and panicked. No doctors. No one can know I am here. Flynn's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of complication he had been trying to avoid. You are running from something. It was not a question, and she did not pretend otherwise. She met his gaze directly, and he saw that determination again, that fire that would not be extinguished no matter how close to death she had come. Someone. My husband. The word hit Flynn like a physical blow, and he stood abruptly, putting more distance between them. Then you need to go back to him or get yourself to a lawman. I cannot help you, please. She struggled to sit up, and this time he did not stop her. Just let me rest for a few hours, then I will leave. I promise. You will never see me again. Flynn looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the bruises now that he knew to look for them. Faded yellow marks on her forearms, a healing cut above her left eyebrow. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. What is your name? Delilah. Delilah Turner. She hesitated, then added, or it used to be Turner, before I married. And your husband, Victor Thorne. He owns the Golden Eagle mine in Virginia City. Flynn knew the name. Everyone in California and Nevada mining country knew Victor Thorne. He was wealthy, powerful, and rumored to be connected to some of the territory's most dangerous men. This woman had not just brought complications to his door. She had brought a potential death sentence. You need to leave. The words came out harsher than he intended. I am sorry for what you are running from, but I cannot get involved in this. Delilah nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. She wiped them away angrily. I understand. Just give me a few minutes to catch my breath and I will go. But when she tried to stand, her legs buckled and Flynn caught her before she hit the floor. He could feel her trembling in his arms, feel how close to the edge she really was. If he sent her away now, she would die out there in the desert. He knew it as surely as he knew his own name. And despite everything, despite his promises and his carefully constructed walls, he could not let that happen. One night, he heard himself say, you can stay one night, get your strength back, then you leave. The relief on her face was so profound it made his chest ache. Thank you. Thank you so much. Flynn carried her to the spare bedroom, another room he never used, and laid her on the bed. I will bring you some food. Then you need to rest. He left before she could respond, closing the door firmly behind him and leaning against it, his eyes closed. What had he just done? In the span of 30 minutes, he had broken his most important rule and potentially put himself in the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous men in Nevada. But when he opened his eyes and looked around his empty house, he realized something had shifted. For the first time in 8 years, his home did not feel quite so much like a prison he had built for himself. Flynn spent the next hour preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, telling himself with each step that he was doing the decent thing, nothing more. Any man would help a woman in distress. It did not mean anything. It did not change anything. She would be gone by morning and his life would return to normal. Except when he carried the tray to her room and found her sleeping, her face finally peaceful, her dark hair spread across his pillow. He knew he was lying to himself. He set the tray on the small table by the bed and started to leave, but her eyes opened, and she caught his hand. Her touch sent electricity racing up his arm. Thank you, she whispered. I know this is not what you want. I can tell you do not want me here, but thank you anyway. Flynn pulled his hand away gently. Eat, then sleep. We will figure out what to do with you in the morning. He left before she could say anything else, heading straight to the barn where he could lose himself in the familiar routine of evening chores. He fed the horses, checked on the cattle in the near pasture, and repaired a broken bridle that did not really need repairing. Anything to avoid thinking about the woman in his house, the woman who had looked at him with those amber eyes and made him feel things he had sworn he would never feel again. It was full dark by the time he headed back to the house, his stomach growling. He had forgotten to eat, too caught up in his own thoughts. The lamp was still burning in Delilah's room, and he found himself standing outside her door, listening to the sound of her breathing. "I know you are out there," she called softly. "You do not have to hide." Flynn pushed open the door. She was sitting up in bed, the empty tray beside her, looking more alive than she had when he found her. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were bright despite her obvious exhaustion. "I was not hiding." A small smile played at her lips. "Of course not. I just wanted to thank you again. And to ask your name since you know mine. Flynn Randall. Flynn." She said it slowly, as if testing how it felt in her mouth. "That suits you." He did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and reached for the tray. "You should sleep. Will you tell me something first?" She pulled the blanket up around her shoulders, suddenly looking vulnerable again. "Why did you help me? You clearly did not want to. You could have just left me there on the road." Flynn was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the honest answer. Finally, he said, "Because leaving you there would have made me just as bad as the man you are running from." Something flickered in her eyes, something that looked like understanding. "You are a good man, Flynn Randall, even if you do not want to be." He left without responding because there was no response to that. In his kitchen, he made himself a cold meal from the leftovers and sat at his worn table, staring at the wall. The house felt different with her in it. Less empty. Less like a monument to his own stubbornness and more like an actual home. It terrified him. Sleep did not come easily that night. Flynn lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of Delilah sleeping just down the hall. He kept thinking about those bruises, about the fear in her eyes when she begged him not to take her to a doctor. What kind of man hurt a woman like that? What kind of man made his wife so afraid that she would rather risk death in the desert than stay with him? Men like Victor Thorne, apparently. Men who thought their money and power gave them the right to do whatever they wanted. Flynn had met men like that before. He had worked for one once in his younger days, before he had saved enough to buy his own land. The experience had taught him that the world was not fair, that justice was not guaranteed, and that sometimes the only way to survive was to keep your head down and take care of yourself. But it had also taught him that there were some lines a man should not cross. Some things that were worth fighting for, even when it was not smart or safe or convenient. He must have finally dozed off because he woke to the sound of screaming. Flynn was out of bed and running before he was fully conscious, his heart pounding as he burst into Delilah's room. She was sitting up in bed, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window, her whole body shaking. "Just a dream," she gasped when she saw him. "I am sorry. It was just a dream." But Flynn could see the terror in her eyes, could see that to her, the dream was as real as the man who had caused it. Without thinking, he sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled her into his arms, holding her while she trembled against his chest. "You are safe here," he heard himself murmur. "I promise. You are safe." She clung to him, her fingers digging into his shoulders, and he could feel her heart racing against his own. They stayed like that for a long time until finally her breathing steadied and the trembling stopped. But even then, neither of them moved. "He would not let me leave," she whispered against his chest. "I tried. 3 times I tried to leave, and every time he found me. The last time he broke my wrist, told me if I tried again he would kill me, and I believed him." Flynn's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "How did you get away this time?" "He went to San Francisco on business. Left me locked in our house with his mother watching me. but she is old and sleeps heavily, and I managed to slip out in the middle of the night. I took a horse and rode as far as I could before it went lame. Then I walked. I was trying to make it to Los Angeles to my sister, but I got turned around somewhere near the Panamint Valley." She pulled back to look at him, and Flynn was struck again by those eyes, by the strength he saw in them despite everything she had been through. "He will come looking for me. Once he realizes I am gone, he will not stop until he finds me. That is why you should not be involved in this. It is too dangerous." "Then you should have thought of that before you collapsed on my road," Flynn said, more gruffly than he intended. A small, sad smile crossed her face. "I did not exactly plan that part." They were so close, closer than Flynn had been to any woman in 8 years, and he was acutely aware of every place their bodies touched. He should move. He should put distance between them. Instead, he found himself reaching up to brush a strand of hair back from her face. "Try to get some more sleep. We will figure this out in the morning." But as he started to stand, she caught his hand again. "Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep. I do not want to be alone." Everything in Flynn screamed that this was a bad idea, that he was already in too deep, that every moment he spent with her made it harder to maintain the walls he had built around his heart. But he could not seem to make himself say no. So he stayed, sitting on the edge of the bed while she lay back down, his hand still clasped in hers. He watched as her eyes grew heavy, as her breathing deepened and steadied, as sleep finally claimed her again. And even then, he stayed a little longer, studying her face in the moonlight, and wondering what it was about this woman that had made him break every rule he had set for himself. When he finally made his way back to his own bed, dawn was breaking over the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Flynn knew he should be thinking about his cattle, about the fence line that still needed mending, about the 100 other things that needed his attention. Instead, all he could think about was the feeling of Delilah in his arms and how much he wanted to keep her safe. It was the most dangerous thought he had had in years. Morning brought clarity, or at least Flynn told himself it did. In the harsh light of day, with coffee warming his hands and his practical mind reasserting itself, he knew what he had to do. Delilah could not stay here. It was not safe for her, and it certainly was not safe for him. He would take her into Skidoo, put her on a stage to Los Angeles, and give her enough money to start over with her sister. It was the right thing to do, the smart thing. He was rehearsing this speech when Delilah emerged from the bedroom, wearing the same torn dress, but looking remarkably better than she had the day before. She had washed her face and done her best with her hair, pulling it back into a simple braid that hung over one shoulder. In the morning light, Flynn could see her properly for the first time, and the sight nearly took his breath away. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fancy clothes or careful grooming. It was in the set of her jaw, the directness of her gaze, the way she carried herself despite everything she had been through. "Good morning," she said quietly, hovering in the doorway as if unsure whether she was welcome in his kitchen. Flynn gestured to the chair across from him. "Coffee." "Please." He poured her a cup, noting how she wrapped both hands around it as if drawing strength from its warmth. They sat in silence for a moment, and Flynn tried to find the words for what he needed to say. Delilah spoke first. "You want me to leave. I want you to be safe." "There is a difference." "Is there?" She met his eyes over the rim of her cup. "Because from where I am sitting, they look like the same thing. Your husband will come looking for you. When he does, he will check everywhere between Virginia City and Los Angeles. This ranch is close enough to that route that he could easily stop here asking questions. So you are worried about yourself, not me." The accusation stung because it was not entirely untrue, but it also was not the whole truth. "I am worried about both of us." Do you have any idea what a man like Victor Thorne will do if he finds you here? Yes. Her voice was flat, emotionless. I know exactly what he will do. He will kill you without a second thought, and he will drag me back to Virginia City and make sure I never have the chance to leave again. That is why I am not asking you to hide me. I will leave today, just as we agreed. She stood, setting down her cup with a decisive clink. Thank you for everything you have done. I will never forget your kindness. Flynn watched her walk toward the bedroom, her spine straight and her head high, and something inside him rebelled against the image of her walking back out into that desert alone. She was strong, yes, but strength only went so far against the odds she was facing. Wait. The word was out before he could stop it. She turned, hope flickering in those amber eyes. The stage does not run until Thursday. That is 3 days from now. He could not believe what he was about to say. You could stay here until then. Keep out of sight. I will take you into town on Thursday morning, put you on that stage myself. Flynn, I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering. He stood, needing to move, and walked to the window overlooking his land. But you have to stay hidden. No going outside during the day. No showing yourself if anyone comes by. As far as anyone knows, I am here alone like always. Why are you doing this? It was the same question she had asked last night, and he still did not have a good answer. Or rather, he had an answer, but it was not one he was ready to admit out loud. Not to her, and certainly not to himself. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally, which was true even if it was not the whole truth. Delilah crossed the room to stand beside him at the window. They looked out at the land together, at the cattle grazing in the distance and the mountains rising up beyond them. It is beautiful here, harsh but beautiful. That is California for you, everything trying to kill you but too pretty to look away from. She laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face completely, and Flynn felt something in his chest shift and settle. This was a mistake. He knew it was a mistake. But somehow it also felt like the first right thing he had done in a very long time. The next 3 days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Flynn went about his work during the day, riding out to check his cattle and mend fences, while Delilah stayed in the house. He had given her his mother's old books, the ones that had been packed away in a trunk since his parents died. And she spent her time reading or looking out the windows at the vast expanse of desert and sky. In the evenings, they ate together at his small kitchen table, and slowly, bit by bit, they began to talk. Not about Victor Thorne or what had happened in Virginia City. Not about Caroline or why Flynn had sworn off women. Instead, they talked about small things. The way the sunset painted the mountains purple and gold. The personalities of his horses, her love of cooking, which she had not been allowed to do in Victor's house because he insisted on employing an entire kitchen staff. What would you cook if you could? Flynn asked on the second night, genuinely curious. Delilah's face lit up. My grandmother's recipes. She was from Mexico originally, came to California during the gold rush. She taught me how to make real tortillas and this incredible chicken soup with vegetables and herbs. And pan dulce, this sweet bread that was better than anything you could buy in any bakery. Could you make it here? She looked around his sparse kitchen doubtfully. You do not have the right ingredients. Tell me what you need. And so the next day, Flynn made a trip into Skidoo, buying flour and lard, dried peppers and herbs, and a dozen other things based on the list Delilah had written out in careful handwriting. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Chen, gave him a curious look. Planning to do some cooking, Flynn. Just stocking up, he said casually, but his heart was pounding. This was exactly what he had told Delilah to avoid, drawing attention, making people wonder. But when he got home and saw Delilah's face light up at the sight of the supplies, He knew he would do it again in a heartbeat. That evening she cooked for him, moving around his kitchen with a confidence and joy he had not seen in her before. She rolled out tortillas, the smell of them cooking on his cast-iron skillet filling the house with warmth. She made the chicken soup, rich and flavorful in a way that made Flynn realize he had been surviving on food, not really eating it for years. And for dessert, she shaped little rounds of sweet dough and fried them until they were golden and perfect. "This is incredible," Flynn said around a mouthful of pan dulce, and he meant it. But he was not just talking about the food. Delilah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "My grandmother always said that cooking was an act of love. You could not make good food without putting your heart into it." They cleaned up together afterward, moving around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that felt dangerously natural. Flynn washed while Delilah dried, and at some point their hands brushed in the soapy water and neither of them pulled away immediately. "Thank you," she said softly, "for buying all of this, for letting me do this. You do not have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You have done so much for me, and I have no way to repay you." Flynn turned to look at her, really look at her, and saw that she was close to tears. Without thinking, he reached out and cupped her face in his wet hand, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "You do not owe me anything, Delilah. I want you to understand that." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "What if I want to owe you something? What if I want a reason to come back someday?" The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Flynn knew he should step back, should remind her that she was leaving tomorrow, that this could never be anything more than a brief moment in time. But instead, he found himself leaning closer, drawn to her like a moth to flame. "Delilah," he whispered, her name a question and a warning all at once. She opened her eyes, and he saw his own confusion and desire reflected back at him. I know this is complicated. I know I should just leave and never look back. But Flynn, I cannot stop thinking about the fact that tomorrow I will get on that stage and I will probably never see you again, and that feels wrong somehow. You are married. To a man I hate. To a man who hurt me and controlled me and made me wish I was dead." Her voice was fierce now. "That is not a real marriage. It never was. The law would not see it that way. The law also says a man has the right to do whatever he wants to his wife, so forgive me if I do not much care what the law thinks." She had a point, and they both knew it. Flynn had seen enough of the world to know that legal and right were not always the same thing. But he had also built his entire life around playing it safe, around not taking risks that could come back to destroy him. And yet, as he looked at Delilah standing in his kitchen, her face flushed from cooking, her eyes bright with unshed tears, he found that he did not care about playing it safe anymore. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was 8 years of loneliness and anger and hurt pouring out all at once, meeting her own desperation and need. She gasped against his mouth and then kissed him back just as fiercely, her arms wrapping around his neck as his hands found her waist and pulled her closer. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard, and Flynn rested his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake, probably." Delilah's fingers traced the line of his jaw. "But I have spent the last 2 years of my life living in fear, doing what I was told, being what Victor wanted me to be. I do not want to do that anymore. I want to make my own choices, even if they are mistakes." "And you choose this." Flynn needed to hear her say it. "I choose you, for whatever time we have, even if it is just tonight." They barely made it to his bedroom. Flynn lifted her into his arms, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, their mouths finding each other again and again as he carried her down the hall. He laid her on his bed, the bed that had felt so empty for so long, and took a moment just to look at her. Her dark hair spread across his pillow, her amber eyes warm with desire and trust. "Are you sure?" he asked one more time, because he needed to give her the chance to change her mind. In answer, she reached up and pulled him down to her. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with a reverence that felt almost sacred. Flynn had been with women before Caroline, but it had never felt like this. It had never felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Delilah's head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The room was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the window, and Flynn could hear coyotes calling to each other in the distance. "I do not want to leave tomorrow," Delilah whispered, Flynn's hand stilled. "You have to, you know you have to, I know, but that does not mean I want to." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Come with me." "What? Come with me to Los Angeles? We could start over there." Together. For one wild moment, Flynn considered it. He imagined selling the ranch, packing up his life, starting fresh in a city where no one knew either of them. It was tempting, so tempting it made his chest ache. But then reality crashed back in. "I cannot just leave. This ranch is everything I have. 8 years of work, of building something from nothing. And I am asking you to give it all up after knowing me for 3 days. I know how that sounds." Delilah sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "I am sorry. That was unfair of me." "Delilah, it is not that I do not want to. But you are still married. If we ran off together, Victor could come after us for that. And even if we made it to Los Angeles, what then? How do we know he would not find us? How do we know we would not just be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives?" She was quiet for a long moment. "You are right. Of course you are right. I was not thinking." But Flynn could see the hurt in her eyes, could feel the distance opening up between them even as they sat side by side. He pulled her back into his arms, holding her close. "Listen to me. You go to Los Angeles. You get established with your sister. Once you are safe, once enough time has passed that Victor has given up looking, you contact me. Send a letter to the post office in Skidoo, and we will figure out what comes next, together." "You mean that?" "I mean it." And as he said the words, Flynn realized they were true. Somehow, in the span of 3 days, this woman had become more important to him than his rules, than his carefully constructed walls, than anything except the ranch itself. What if he never stops looking? Then we will deal with that when the time comes. But Delilah, you have to give yourself a chance at freedom first. Really freedom, not just running from one man to another. She nodded against his chest, and he felt her tears soaking into his skin. They held each other as the night deepened, neither of them sleeping, both of them trying to memorize this moment before tomorrow came and changed everything. Morning arrived too quickly. Flynn rose before dawn, as was his habit, and dressed quietly while Delilah slept. He made coffee and sat at his kitchen table, watching the sun rise and trying to prepare himself for what was about to happen. He had survived Caroline leaving him. He could survive this too, except it already felt different. Caroline had been a dream, a fantasy of what his life could be. Delilah was real. She was complicated and broken and brave, and she had fit into his life in a way that felt inevitable, as if she had always been meant to be here. He heard her moving around in the bedroom, getting dressed, getting ready to leave. When she emerged, she was wearing the same torn dress, but she had cleaned it as best she could and fixed her hair. She looked beautiful and heartbroken, and Flynn wanted nothing more than to tell her to forget the plan and stay. But he did not, because he knew that would be selfish. She needed to get to safety, to her sister, to a life where Victor Thorne could not control her anymore. "Ready?" he asked, standing. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The ride into Skidoo was silent. Flynn had hitched up his wagon rather than riding, giving them both space but also feeling like a barrier between them. Delilah sat beside him on the bench seat, close enough to touch but carefully not touching, and watched the landscape roll by. Skidoo was starting to wake up as they arrived. The town had sprung up around the gold mines, growing from nothing into a bustling community of a few hundred people in just a couple of years. It was still rough around the edges, the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card, but it had the essentials. A general store, a saloon, a hotel, a post office, and most importantly for their purposes, a stage stop. Flynn pulled up in front of the stage office and helped Delilah down from the wagon. He bought her a ticket to Los Angeles, adding extra money so she would have something to live on when she got there. "I cannot take all this," she protested when she saw how much he was giving her. "Yes, you can. Consider it payment for the best meals I've had in 8 years. That earned him a small smile, but it faded quickly as they heard the stage driver calling that they would be leaving in 5 minutes. They stood facing each other on the dusty street, and Flynn struggled to find the words for goodbye. "What did you say to someone who had changed your entire world in 3 days?" Delilah solved the problem by stepping forward and kissing him, right there in the middle of Skidoo where anyone could see. It was a kiss full of promise and regret, of things unsaid and feelings too big to name. When she pulled back, there were tears streaming down her face. "I will write, as soon as I can. I will be waiting." She climbed aboard the stage, and Flynn stepped back to watch it pull away. He stood there long after it disappeared from view, his heart feeling like it had been torn from his chest. Finally, he climbed back into his wagon and headed home, the ranch he loved suddenly feeling like the loneliest place in the world. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Flynn's life. He threw himself into work, repairing things that did not need repairing, expanding his herd, building a new barn he did not really need. Anything to keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. But at night, alone in his house, he could not stop thinking about Delilah. The way she laughed, the way she moved through his kitchen, the way she had fit so perfectly in his arms. He checked the post office every few days, always hoping for a letter and always being disappointed. As the weeks turned into a month, and then 2 months, Flynn started to wonder if she had changed her mind. Maybe she had gotten to Los Angeles and realized that what they had shared was just a moment born out of desperation and proximity. Maybe she had moved on with her life and decided a rancher in the middle of nowhere was not worth the complications. He tried to make himself accept that possibility, tried to convince himself he could go back to the life he had before. But his house felt wrong now. Every room reminded him of her. The kitchen where she had cooked, the bedroom where they had made love, even the front room where he had first laid her down felt charged with her absence. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late September, he walked into the post office and found a letter waiting for him. His name was written in careful, feminine handwriting he recognized immediately. Flynn's hands shook as he opened it, right there in front of Mrs. Chen, who ran the post office, too desperate to wait until he was alone. "Dear Flynn," it read, "I am sorry it has taken me so long to write. Getting established here has been more difficult than I expected. My sister welcomed me with open arms, but her husband was less enthusiastic about housing a fugitive from Virginia City. I have found work at a restaurant, cooking, which feels like the most freedom I have had in years." Flynn smiled despite himself. Of course she had found work cooking. The letter continued, "I think about you every day, about your ranch and your kindness and the way you made me feel safe for the first time since I made the mistake of marrying Victor. I want to see you again, but I do not know if it is safe yet. He has not found me as far as I know, but I have heard through acquaintances that he is still looking. I cannot risk bringing him to your door." Flynn's smile faded. The thought of Victor Thorne still hunting Delilah made his blood boil. "Please write back to me. Tell me about the ranch, about your life. Even if we cannot be together yet, I want to know that you are well. The address is below." She signed it simply, Delilah. Flynn read the letter 3 more times before carefully folding it and putting it in his pocket. Then he bought paper and ink from Mrs. Chen and sat right there at the post office writing his response. He told her about the new barn, about the cattle that were thriving in the fall weather, about how empty his house felt without her in it. He wrote pages, more than he had written in his entire life, trying to capture everything he felt and everything he wanted to say. And then, at the end, he wrote, "I do not care how long we have to wait. I do not care what complications come with being together. You belong here with me, and I am prepared to fight for that, even if I have to fight Victor Thorne himself." He sent the letter that day, and thus began a correspondence that would sustain them both through the long months ahead. They wrote to each other weekly, sometimes more. Delilah told him about her life in Los Angeles, about the restaurant where she worked, and the recipes she was learning, and the slowly growing hope that maybe Victor had given up his search. Flynn wrote about the ranch, about expanding his herd, about the changes happening in Skidoo as the mines continued to produce gold. But mostly, they wrote about their feelings for each other. The distance and the time apart had not diminished what they felt. If anything, it had crystallized it, made it more real and more urgent. Flynn found himself looking forward to her letters more than anything else in his life, found himself measuring time in weeks between correspondence rather than seasons or years. Winter came to California, which meant cooler temperatures but not much snow at the lower elevation where Flynn's ranch sat. He spent Christmas alone, as he had every year since his parents died, but this time he had Delilah's letters to keep him company. She sent him one that arrived on Christmas Eve, telling him about her plans to cook for her sister's family, and how she wished he could be there to taste her grandmother's special holiday tamales. "I miss you," she wrote, "more than I thought it was possible to miss someone. When I close my eyes at night, I can still feel your arms around me, can still hear your voice telling me I was safe. I want to feel that way again. I want to come home to you." Flynn kept that letter folded in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, and read it every night before bed. Spring arrived with unexpected storms that flooded the dry washes and turned the desert briefly green. Flynn was out mending fences after one particularly heavy rain when he saw a rider approaching his ranch. He straightened, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept on his saddle, old habits from living alone making him cautious of unexpected visitors. But as the rider got closer, Flynn felt his blood run cold. The man was well-dressed, riding an expensive horse, and there was something about the way he carried himself that spoke of wealth and power. Flynn did not need to ask who he was. Victor Thorne had found him. The man pulled up about 20 feet away, staying mounted, his eyes cold as they surveyed Flynn and the ranch behind him. He was older than Flynn had expected, maybe 45, with silver threading through his dark hair and a hard set to his jaw. "You are Flynn Randall." It was not a question. "And you are trespassing on my land." Flynn kept his voice even despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Victor smiled, but it held no warmth. "I am looking for my wife, Delilah. I have reason to believe she passed through this area last summer. A lot of people pass through this area. It is on the road to Los Angeles." Yes, but not many women traveling alone, not many women who would catch the attention of a bachelor rancher living out here all by himself. Victor leaned forward in his saddle. "I have been making inquiries in Skidoo." Seems you bought some unusual supplies last July. Unusual for a man who normally buys only the basics, things like flour for making tortillas, dried peppers, herbs. Flynn's jaw clenched. He had known this was a risk, had known he was drawing attention, but he had thought enough time had passed that it would not matter. I like to cook. Is that a crime? No, but harboring a fugitive wife is. I do not know what you are talking about. Victor studied him for a long moment, and Flynn could see the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. Let me be clear about something, Mr. Randall. Delilah belongs to me. She is my property by law. If I find out you helped her, if I find out you know where she is, I will see you charged with every crime I can think of. And if that does not work, well, accidents happen out here in the desert, do they not? Every muscle in Flynn's body wanted to pull his rifle and end this threat right now. But he was not a killer, despite what this man was making him want to become. Is that a threat? It is a promise. Delilah is very good at manipulating men, at making them think she needs rescuing. Whatever story she told you, whatever lies she spun, they were not true. She is my wife and she belongs with me. Even if what you are saying was true, even if she had been here, what makes you think she would still be? It has been 9 months. Because I know my wife. She does not just run. She makes connections, finds people to protect her. If she was here, if you helped her, then you know where she is now. Flynn met his gaze steadily. I have not seen your wife. But if I had, if some woman had shown up on my property beaten and scared, running from a husband who broke her wrist for trying to leave, I would have helped her get as far away from him as possible. And I would not tell him a damn thing about where she went. The admission hung between them, dangerous and deliberate. Flynn was playing with fire, but he could not stand there and listen to Victor Thorne talk about Delilah like she was a possession he had misplaced. Victor's face darkened with rage. So you admit it? I admit nothing. I said if. Do you need me to define the word for you? For a moment, Flynn thought Victor was going to draw a weapon. His hand moved toward his belt, and Flynn's own hand tightened on his rifle. But then Victor seemed to think better of it. He was on Flynn's property, threatening a man who had every right to defend himself. It would not look good if he had to explain why he shot a rancher in the middle of nowhere. This is not over, Victor said quietly. I will find her, and when I do, I will make sure she never runs again. As for you, Mr. Randall, you have made a powerful enemy today. I suggest you think about that next time you consider harboring someone else's wife. He turned his horse and rode away, and Flynn watched him go until he was out of sight. Then he walked back to his house on shaking legs and sat down heavily at his kitchen table. This changed everything. Victor knew he had helped Delilah, or at least strongly suspected it, which meant he might also suspect she was in Los Angeles. Which meant Delilah was in more danger now than she had been before. Flynn grabbed paper and ink and started writing immediately. He told her about Victor's visit, about the threats he had made, about the need for her to be even more careful now. He told her that maybe she should leave Los Angeles, go somewhere further away, somewhere Victor could not track her. But even as he wrote it, Flynn knew it was not enough. Words on paper would not keep her safe. The only way to truly protect her was to deal with Victor Thorne directly. And there was only one way to do that. Flynn finished his letter and added one more paragraph. I am coming to Los Angeles. We need to talk about our future, about how to end this properly. You are not safe as long as you are still married to him. We need to figure out how to get you free, legally and permanently. Wait for me. I will be there within a week. He sent the letter that same day and spent the next 24 hours preparing for the journey. He arranged for his neighbor, old Sam Wilson, to look after his cattle and horses while he was gone. He withdrew money from his account at the Skidoo Bank, enough to pay for a lawyer if they needed one. And he packed a bag with clean clothes and his father's good suit, the one he had not worn since his parents' funeral. The journey to Los Angeles took 3 days by stage, 3 days of Flynn sitting in uncomfortable silence while his mind raced with possibilities and plans. He had never been to a city as big as Los Angeles, had spent his whole life in small towns and open spaces, and the thought of navigating it to find Delilah felt overwhelming. But he had her address from her letters, and when he finally arrived, dusty and exhausted, he hired a carriage to take him directly to the restaurant where she worked. It was late afternoon, and the place was busy with the dinner crowd starting to arrive. Flynn walked in, his heart pounding, and asked the first person he saw where he could find Delilah Thorne. The man pointed toward the kitchen, and Flynn pushed through the doors without waiting for permission. The kitchen was chaos, hot and loud and full of people moving with purpose. But even in all that confusion, Flynn spotted her immediately. She was standing at a large stove, stirring something in a pot, her face flushed from the heat and her hair tied back in a practical bun. "Delilah," he called out, and she turned. For a moment, she just stared at him, her face cycling through shock, confusion, and then pure joy. Then she was running toward him, abandoning her post and throwing herself into his arms. Flynn caught her and held on tight, burying his face in her neck and breathing in the scent of her, cooking oil and sweat and something uniquely Delilah. "You are here," she gasped. "You are really here. I got your letter this morning. I did not think you would come so quickly. I had to see you. Had to make sure you were safe." They were causing a scene. The other kitchen workers were staring, and someone who looked like the manager was starting to move toward them with an annoyed expression. Delilah pulled back, laughing through her tears. "I have to finish my shift, but wait for me. Please? I am done in 2 hours. I will wait as long as it takes." Flynn found a corner table in the restaurant dining room and sat nursing a cup of coffee that was periodically refilled by a sympathetic waitress who seemed to understand he was waiting for someone important. He watched the door to the kitchen, catching glimpses of Delilah moving around inside, and marveled at the fact that he was really here, that she was really just a few feet away after months of separation. When her shift finally ended, she came out still wearing her work dress, her hair falling loose around her shoulders where she had pulled it free of its bun. She looked tired but radiant, and Flynn stood to meet her as she crossed the room. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let me show you where I live." She led him through the darkening streets of Los Angeles to a modest house in a decent neighborhood. Her sister and brother-in-law were out, she explained, which gave them privacy to talk. The house was small but comfortable, nothing like the mansion Delilah had described living in with Victor, but Flynn could see that she was happy here. They sat together on the sofa in her sister's front room, and Flynn took both her hands in his. "I should not have let you leave without me. I should have come with you in the first place. You had your ranch, I understood. The ranch does not matter as much as I thought it did, not compared to you." Flynn took a deep breath. "Delilah, I want you to marry me, but we cannot do that while you are still legally bound to Victor. So we need to figure out how to end your marriage, really end it." Delilah bit her lip. "Divorce is almost impossible, Flynn. The courts do not grant them easily, especially not when the husband contests it, and Victor would fight it with everything he has. What if he could not fight it? What if he was given a choice between granting you a divorce or facing charges himself? What kind of charges?" Flynn had been thinking about this for days, turning it over in his mind during the long stage ride. "Assault, battery, false imprisonment. You said he locked you in the house. That is a crime. If we could get witnesses, prove what he did to you, we might be able to force him into giving you a divorce in exchange for not pressing charges." who would testify against Victor Thorne. Everyone in Virginia City either works for him or is afraid of him. What about his mother? The one who was watching you, Delilah shook her head. She would never betray her son. She thinks wives should obey their husbands no matter what. Then we find other witnesses, servants, doctors who treated your injuries, anyone who saw what was happening. Flynn squeezed her hands. I know it is a long shot. I know it might not work, but we have to try. Because I cannot spend the rest of my life writing you letters and only seeing you in stolen moments. I want you with me. I want you to be my wife, legally and in every way. Tears were streaming down Delilah's face now, but she was smiling through them. I want that too, more than anything. They talked late into the night, making plans and discussing strategies. Delilah told him about a maid who had worked in Victor's house, a young woman named Sarah who had been fired for speaking up when Victor hit Delilah in front of her. Maybe Sarah would be willing to testify. And there was a doctor in Carson City who had treated Delilah's broken wrist. He had been kind to her, suspicious of her story that she had fallen down the stairs. Maybe he would help. It was not much, but it was a start. Flynn would hire a lawyer here in Los Angeles, someone who specialized in difficult divorce cases. They would build their case carefully, gathering evidence and testimony. And when they had enough, they would confront Victor with it and give him the choice. Grant Delilah her freedom, or face public humiliation and possibly criminal charges. It was risky. Victor could refuse to cooperate, could use his wealth and influence to make their lives miserable. But it was also their best chance at a real future together. As the night grew later and exhaustion finally caught up with them, Delilah showed Flynn to the small guest room where he would be staying. They stood in the doorway, neither wanting to say goodnight. I missed you, Delilah whispered. Every single day. I missed you too. Flynn cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly. But we are together now, and I am not leaving until we figure this out. Over the next weeks, Flynn stayed in Los Angeles and worked tirelessly on their plan. He found a lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret Ross, who had successfully handled several difficult divorce cases and was not intimidated by Victor Thorne's reputation. Together, they began gathering evidence. Sarah, the former maid, was easier to find than they expected. She had moved to Sacramento and was working for another family, and when Margaret contacted her, she agreed immediately to testify. She had been carrying guilt about not doing more to help Delilah, and this was her chance to make it right. The doctor in Carson City was more reluctant. He had his practice to think about and did not want to make an enemy of Victor Thorne. But when Delilah traveled to Nevada with Flynn and showed him the scars from where her wrist had been broken and had healed improperly, he agreed to provide a written statement detailing his medical opinion that her injuries were consistent with abuse, not an accident. They found other witnesses too. A shopkeeper in Virginia City who had seen Delilah with a black eye, a neighbor who had heard her screaming. Each piece of evidence was small on its own, but together they painted a damning picture. Finally, after 2 months of work, Margaret declared they had enough. She drafted a letter to Victor Thorne outlining their evidence and giving him an ultimatum. Agree to an uncontested divorce, including a property settlement that would leave Delilah financially independent, or they would file criminal charges and take their case public. Victor prided himself on his reputation as a respectable businessman. The threat of public scandal might be enough to make him cooperate. They sent the letter and waited. Flynn stayed with Delilah during those tense days, both of them jumping every time there was a knock at the door. He held her at night when the nightmares came back, whispering reassurances that they would get through this together. Victor's response came 2 weeks later. He agreed to the divorce, The letter was terse, barely a paragraph, but the message was clear. He would grant Delilah her freedom in exchange for their silence about his treatment of her. The property settlement Margaret had proposed was acceptable. He never wanted to see or hear from Delilah again. When Delilah read the letter, she collapsed into Flynn's arms, sobbing with relief. It was over. She was free. The legal process still took time. Papers had to be filed, waiting periods observed, judges petitioned. But on a warm day in late August, almost exactly 1 year after Delilah had collapsed on the road outside Flynn's ranch, a judge in Los Angeles officially dissolved her marriage to Victor Thorne. They were married a week later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, with Delilah's sister and Margaret Ross as witnesses. Delilah wore a simple blue dress that brought out the amber in her eyes, and Flynn wore his father's good suit. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, promising to love and protect each other, to build a life together based on trust and respect, and the kind of freedom that came from being with someone who truly valued you. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn kissed Delilah with all the pent-up emotion of the past year, and she kissed him back just as fiercely. Their new beginning sealed with that moment. They took the stage back to Skidoo the next day, and when Flynn's ranch came into view, he felt something in his chest settle and expand at the same time. This was home. But now, finally, it would be a real home. Not a fortress built to keep people out, but a place where love could grow and flourish. Flynn helped Delilah down from the wagon, and together, they walked up to the house he had sworn no woman would ever enter. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the kitchen where she had cooked for him that first time. "Welcome home, Mrs. Randall," Flynn said softly. Delilah looked around the house with tears in her eyes. "I have been dreaming about this moment for a year. It is even better than I imagined." They spent the rest of that day and evening reacquainting themselves with the house and each other. Delilah unpacked the few belongings she had brought from Los Angeles while Flynn showed her the improvements he had made to the ranch. They cooked dinner together, moving around the kitchen with the same ease they had found that first night, and ate while watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. And that night, in the bedroom they now shared as husband and wife, they made love with a tenderness and passion that came from knowing they had all the time in the world. No more stolen moments, no more goodbyes, just the two of them, building a life together. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Flynn and Delilah worked together to expand the ranch, building it into one of the most successful operations in the region. Delilah used her inheritance from the divorce settlement to buy more land and cattle, becoming a full partner in the business rather than just a rancher's wife. Flynn loved seeing her confidence grow, loved the way she threw herself into ranch work with the same passion she brought to everything else. They made friends in Skidoo, becoming part of the community in a way Flynn had never allowed himself to be before. Delilah's cooking became legendary, and she was always being asked to provide meals for town gatherings and celebrations. Flynn found himself enjoying the social aspect of life in a way that surprised him. With Delilah by his side, the world felt less threatening, less like something he needed to defend himself against. 2 years after they married, Delilah told Flynn she was pregnant. He was working on the new stable he was building when she came out to tell him, and the look on her face told him it was important before she even spoke the words. "I am going to have a baby," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. Flynn dropped his hammer and pulled her into his arms, his own eyes wet with tears. "Are you sure?" The doctor confirmed it yesterday. "Flynn, we are going to be parents." They held each other in the middle of the stable, surrounded by sawdust and tools, and Flynn felt a joy so profound it almost scared him. After everything they had been through, after all the pain and struggle, they were being given this gift, a family of their own. Their son was born in early spring of 1890, arriving during a rare rainstorm that left the desert blooming with wildflowers. They named him James Robert Randall, James after Flynn's father and Robert after Delilah's. He had Flynn's dark hair and Delilah's amber eyes, and from the moment Flynn held him, he knew his life had changed forever. Watching Delilah with their son was a revelation. She was a natural mother, patient and loving and fierce in her protection of him. Flynn loved seeing that side of her, loved the way she sang to James in Spanish and taught him words in both languages as he grew. He loved coming in from a day's work to find them in the kitchen together, Delilah cooking while James played at her feet. When James was 2, they had a daughter. Emma Grace was born on a hot summer day, arriving faster than the doctor could get there. Flynn ended up delivering her himself with Delilah's guidance, and it was the most terrifying and amazing experience of his life. Emma had her mother's determination from day one, crying lustily to announce her arrival and refusing to be placated by anything except being held. Their family was complete, Flynn thought, as he sat on his porch one evening watching James chase butterflies while Delilah rocked Emma in her arms. This was everything he had never known he wanted. The house that had once felt like a prison now rang with laughter and life. The land that he had worked alone for so many years was now a legacy he was building for his children. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, catching him watching her. "How lucky I am. How different my life would be if you had not collapsed on my road that day." Delilah smiled, that warm smile that still made his heart skip a beat even after all these years. "I was thinking the same thing. About how close I came to dying out there in the desert, and how finding you saved my life in every way that mattered. We saved each other." "Yes," she agreed softly, "we did." As the sun set over the mountains and their children played in the yard, Flynn thought back to the man he had been before Delilah. Closed off, bitter, convinced that protecting himself meant keeping everyone at a distance. He had built walls so high he had almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. And then a woman had stumbled into his life, broken and desperate, and he had made the choice to help her despite all his rules and promises to himself. That single decision, that moment of compassion that went against everything he thought he believed, had led to this. To a family to love, to a life richer and fuller than he had ever imagined possible. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. James grew into a thoughtful, serious boy who loved working alongside his father on the ranch. He learned to ride almost before he could walk, and by the time he was 10, he could rope a calf as well as any of the ranch hands Flynn had started hiring as the operation expanded. Emma was different. She had her mother's love of cooking and her father's stubbornness, a combination that made her both delightful and challenging. She demanded to learn everything, to be included in every decision, and she had no patience for anyone who tried to tell her she could not do something because she was a girl. Flynn and Delilah encouraged her independence, remembering too well what it had cost Delilah to be trapped in a marriage with no autonomy. In 1895, when James was 5 and Emma was 3, they received news that Victor Thorne had died. He had been killed in a mining accident in Nevada, crushed when a shaft collapsed. Margaret Ross, their lawyer who had become a good friend, sent them the newspaper clipping with a brief note. "You are well and truly free now." Flynn expected Delilah to feel something at the news, relief or sadness or even just closure. But when he showed her the clipping, She simply read it once, folded it up, and handed it back to him. "That is the past," she said simply, "and I am more interested in the future." They never spoke of Victor Thorne again. He had taken up enough of their lives, caused enough pain. Now he was gone, and they could finally close that chapter completely. The turn of the century brought changes to Skidoo and the surrounding area. The gold mines that had built the town were starting to play out, and people were moving away in search of new opportunities. Flynn and Delilah considered leaving too, maybe moving to a larger town where there would be better schools for the children. But in the end, they decided to stay. This land was theirs, had been built by their sweat and determination. They would not abandon it just because times were changing. Instead, they adapted. Flynn started breeding horses alongside his cattle, taking advantage of the growing demand for quality mounts. Delilah opened a small restaurant in Skidoo, running it with the same skill and passion she brought to her home cooking. It became a gathering place for the community, somewhere people could come for a good meal and good conversation. Their children grew into young adults. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing a natural talent for the business side that Flynn had always struggled with. Emma split her time between helping her mother at the restaurant and pursuing her own interests. She wanted to be a teacher, she announced when she was 16, and she started working with the small school in Skidoo, learning the profession from the elderly teacher who had been there since the town was founded. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Flynn took Delilah back to the spot on the road where he had first found her. It was a warm summer evening, and they rode out together on horseback, something they still did regularly despite their busy lives. "Right here," Flynn said, dismounting. "This is where you were lying when I found you." Delilah climbed down from her horse and stood beside him, looking at the dusty road that looked no different than it had 20 years ago. "I was so scared that day. I thought I was going to die out here alone with Victor winning in the end. But you did not die. You survived, and you built a life you can be proud of." She turned to face him, her amber eyes still as beautiful as they had been that first day despite the lines time had added to her face. "We built a life, together. That is the important part." Flynn pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the sun began to set behind them. "I love you, Delilah Randall. I loved you from the moment I saw you, even though I was too stubborn to admit it, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Flynn Randall. My stubborn, wonderful, kind-hearted husband who broke all his own rules for me." They kissed as the sky turned pink and gold, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The years continued their steady march forward. James married a girl from a neighboring ranch when he was 23, and they built a house on the north section of Flynn and Delilah's land. Within a year, they had given Flynn and Delilah their first grandchild, a boy they named Flynn after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Flynn felt his heart overflow with a joy he had not known was possible. Emma pursued her teaching career, eventually taking over the school in Skidoo when the old teacher retired. She remained unmarried into her late 20s, declaring she was too busy and too independent to worry about finding a husband. Flynn worried about her sometimes, but Delilah just laughed. "She is exactly like I was at that age," Delilah said. "She will find someone when the time is right. And if she does not, she will still have a good life. That is what matters." Emma did eventually marry, at 30, to a traveling professor who stopped in Skidoo to give a lecture on Western history, and stayed because he fell in love with the school teacher. They had a small wedding at the ranch, and Flynn walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, proud of the strong, independent woman she had become. Flynn was 53 when he had his first heart attack. It was not severe, but it was a warning. The doctor told him he needed to slow down, to let James handle more of the ranch work, to take better care of himself. Flynn tried, but it was hard. The ranch had been his life for so long that stepping back felt like giving up. Delilah helped him through it, as she had helped him through everything else. She made sure he rested, monitored what he ate, and most importantly, reminded him that he had built something that would last beyond him. James was more than capable of running the ranch. Flynn had done his job. Now it was time to enjoy the fruits of his labor, so Flynn learned to slow down. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope the way he had taught James. He sat on the porch with Delilah in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that had been wild when they first met and was now dotted with the houses and lives of their children and grandchildren. He read books, something he had never had time for before. And he appreciated every moment with Delilah, knowing now how precious and fleeting time really was. On a clear autumn evening in 1912, Flynn sat on that same porch with Delilah beside him, their hands clasped together. They were both in their 50s now, their hair gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard-lived lives. But Flynn still looked at Delilah and saw the fierce, determined woman who had stumbled into his life and changed everything. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Marrying me instead of someone easier, someone who could have given you a life in the city with more comforts?" Delilah turned to look at him, and her smile was soft and full of love. "Not for a single second. This life, this ranch, our children, this is everything I ever wanted. Everything I did not even know to want until I found it. Even after everything with Victor. Even knowing what you went through to get here, especially because of that. Because I know the difference between a life lived in fear and a life lived in love. And Flynn, every single day with you has been love. Even the hard days. Even the scary days. It has all been worth it." They sat together as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them 25 years ago when everything was uncertain and scary and new. But now, looking back on the life they had built together, Flynn knew he would not change a single thing. He had sworn no woman would ever step foot in his house, had built walls around his heart that he thought were unbreakable. But Delilah had broken through all of it with nothing more than her courage, her strength, and her amber eyes that saw right through his defenses to the man he really was underneath. She had saved him just as much as he had saved her that day on the dusty California road. And together, they had built something more beautiful and lasting than either of them could have created alone. Their story was not one of perfect people or easy choices. It was a story of two broken people who found each other at exactly the right moment and chose, again and again, to build a life together despite the obstacles. It was a story of love that was earned through struggle and sacrifice, that was tested by distance and danger and doubt, and that emerged stronger for having survived it all. As they grew older together, Flynn and Delilah became the heart of their community. Their ranch was a gathering place for family and friends, their door always open to anyone who needed a meal or a place to stay. Delilah's restaurant in town became an institution, run by Emma when Delilah finally decided to retire at 60. The recipes passed down from her grandmother were now being passed to her own grandchildren, ensuring that legacy would continue. Flynn trained several young ranchers over the years, teaching them the same lessons he had learned through hard experience. He was known as a fair man, tough but compassionate, someone who kept his word and expected others to do the same. The promise he had once made, to never let a woman into his house, had become a family joke. His house was always full of women. His wife, his daughter, his daughters-in-law, his granddaughters, and he loved every one of them fiercely. When Flynn was 60, he had another heart attack, more serious this time. He spent a week in the hospital in Los Angeles, with Delilah never leaving his side. The doctors warned that he might not have much more time, that his heart was worn out from years of hard work and high-altitude living. But Flynn surprised them all. He recovered, slowly but surely, and returned to the ranch. He could not do the physical work anymore, but he could sit on the porch and supervise, could offer advice and wisdom to James and the ranch hands. Most importantly, he could spend time with Delilah, appreciating every moment they had together. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1928, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a grand party at the ranch, with food and music and dancing. Flynn watched Delilah move through the crowd, still beautiful at 60, still the woman who had captured his heart 4 decades ago. At one point in the evening, he pulled her aside to the spot where they had first kissed in his kitchen. The house had been expanded over the years, but this room remained the same, the heart of their home. 40 years, Flynn said softly. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever. Both, Delilah agreed. It is both. She cupped his face in her hands, her touch as familiar as his own heartbeat. Thank you for the life you gave me. Thank you for being brave enough to break your own rules. Thank you for being worth breaking them for. They kissed then, in the kitchen where their love story had really begun, surrounded by the sounds of their family celebrating in the other rooms. And Flynn thought, not for the first time, that collapsing in the road that hot summer day in 1887 was the best thing that had ever happened to Delilah. And finding her there was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Flynn Randall passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1932, at the age of 75. He was in his own bed, in the house he had built with his own hands, with Delilah beside him holding his hand. His last words to her were simple. I love you. I will find you again. Delilah lived for another 8 years, staying on the ranch that had been her salvation and her home. She spent those years surrounded by her children and grandchildren, teaching, cooking, and telling stories about the man who had saved her life, and then spent the rest of his life proving that love could be bigger than fear. She passed away in 1940, on a warm summer evening much like the one when she had first arrived at Flynn's ranch. Her last conscious thought was of Flynn waiting for her, and of the life they had built together against all odds. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had watched over their love story from the beginning. Their children installed a simple marker that read, Flynn and Delilah Randall. They found each other. They built a life. They loved completely. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through James and his children. Emma's descendants became teachers and scholars, spreading throughout California and beyond. But they all returned regularly to the ranch, to the place where Flynn and Delilah had proved that 2 broken people could find wholeness together, that rules made in pain could be broken for love, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the chances you took, not the walls you built. And if you visit that land today, stand in the right spot at sunset, some say you can still feel the echo of their love. A stubborn rancher who swore off women and a desperate woman who needed saving, brought together by fate and held together by choice, building a legacy that lasted long after they were gone. Their story became part of the family mythology, told and retold to each new generation. How Flynn had sworn no woman would ever enter his house. How Delilah had collapsed on his road, more dead than alive. How he had broken his most sacred rule at first sight of her, and how that single act of compassion had led to a love that shaped not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. It was a reminder that walls built to protect ourselves often end up imprisoning us instead. That rules made in reaction to pain can keep us from experiencing joy. And that sometimes, the thing we swear we will never do, the line we vow we will never cross, is exactly what we need to do to find the life we are meant to live. Flynn and Delilah's great-grandchildren still live on that land, still raise cattle and horses on the same acres their ancestors claimed from the California desert. They still cook with Delilah's recipes and run the ranch using principles Flynn established over a century ago. And they all know the story of how it began, with a woman in need and a man brave enough to let her in, despite every reason not to. In the end, that is what love is, not the absence of fear or doubt or complication, but the choice to open your heart anyway, to let someone in despite the risk, to break your own rules because you have found something worth more than your pride or your protection. Flynn Randall learned that lesson on a hot summer day in 1887, when a dying woman on his road gave him a choice between his promises and his heart. He chose his heart, and it led him to 40 years of happiness, a family that carried his legacy forward, and a love story that proved that second chances are real, that healing is possible, and that sometimes the thing we resist most strongly is the exact thing that will save us. Their story ended, as all stories must. But the love they built, the family they created, and the lessons they taught lived on. The ranch house that Flynn had once kept empty and closed off was now always full of life and laughter. The road where Delilah had nearly died was now traveled by their descendants, going about their daily lives, none of them knowing that everything they had began right there, in that exact spot, with one man's decision to break his own rule. And somewhere beyond the sunset, beyond the mountains that had watched over their love, Flynn and Delilah were together again. In a place where there were no more rules to break, no more walls to tear down, no more obstacles between them and the love they had fought so hard to protect. Just the two of them forever, exactly as they had promised each other on that courthouse steps so many years ago. The cowboy rancher who had sworn off women and the woman who had needed saving had found each other against all odds. They had built a life together that was messy and complicated and absolutely beautiful. And in the end, that was what mattered, not the pain that came before or the obstacles they had to overcome, just the love they chose again and again, every single day until death finally parted them. And even then, as Delilah had believed in her final moments, it was not really an ending. It was just another beginning in a place where the desert sky was always golden at sunset, where the land stretched on forever, and where love, once found, could never truly be lost. That was the real legacy of Flynn and Delilah Randall, not the ranch or the money or even the family they created, but the proof that love, real love, the kind that changes everything, was worth any risk, worth breaking any rule, worth fighting for with everything you had. And for everyone who came after them, who heard their story and saw what they had built, that lesson echoed on. Love bravely. Love completely. And when life gives you a chance at something real, take it, even if it means breaking every rule you have ever made, even if it scares you, even if the odds seem impossible. Because in the end, as Flynn and Delilah proved, love is always worth it.